Hello, my name is Mandy Tice, and I am Director of School of Atelier Arts. Today, I'd like to introduce to you what an atelier is. We're going to go through a PowerPoint together where I will explain to you what an atelier is, what they do, what purpose they serve, and how you can find one if you're interested in attending one. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Ateliers are art schools that are especially designed to create realistic drawing and painting instruction and provide that type of training and skills to their students. They focus on realism skills specifically, and realism skills are actually quite complex, and there's a lot of information that is needed to be learned by a student in order to create realistic drawings and realistic paintings. Most of this artistic information has been built upon generation after generation of artists over the course of hundreds of years. So it's not just one person reinventing the wheel every time they want to draw or paint something realistically. It's inherited information that artists have been collecting from all over the world and passing down to each other. Now, this type of training fell out of favor about 100 years ago with the advent of modern art. And part of that reason was because the modern artists believed that training would ruin your creativity. So even though these artists like Mondrian or Picasso had a lot of classical atelier drawing and painting training themselves, they never passed that information on. And when you have a belief that knowledge will somehow kill your creativity and you choose not to pass that on, all of a sudden we have this information that's been disrupted. So the reason Rembrandt could paint like Rembrandt wasn't just because he was Rembrandt. He actually trained in an atelier and learned many of the skills that he used in his paintings there. The same is true for many other what we call great master or old master painters. They trained in an atelier. Leonardo da Vinci trained in an atelier. So it's not something that people are bopped on the head with and, woo, I can draw and paint realistically. No, everybody has to work really hard, and you have to train under somebody who actually has these skills. Because atelier training fell out of favor about 100 years ago, by the 1980s there were really only two places where Westerners could get this knowledge. One of them was in Florence with Enrico Simi and Pietro Annigoni, who were separate entities but somewhat overlapping, and then also in Boston with R.H. Ives Gammell. So most of the people that have atelier training today are somehow connected to one of those two places. For me personally, I trained with Julia Aristides, who trained with Richard Lack, who trained with Gammell. So that's one of my lineages that I've inherited. So it is inherited information, and anybody can learn this. This is not magic that only certain people can do if they get bopped on the head by a talent fairy when they're born. No, that is a complete lie. That's not true. What is true is that anybody that works really hard to learn very complex and complicated information that is required to draw and paint realistically can do so. And the way you do it is by attending an atelier. So a lot of people don't realize that ateliers are actually collected knowledge, but also that there's scientific discoveries in art, just like there is in every other field. So an example of this is that linear perspective was kind of discovered in Renaissance Italy, and it allowed artists to create a deep sense of space in their paintings. But that's not the only way to create a deep sense of space. The Japanese actually created a method and invented a method where they were using soft edges to show things that were really far away. And they arguably had a better way of representing deep space in paintings. And when Japan opened up to American artists, when Japanese prints and things like that began getting imported into the United States in the late 1800s, you can really see the effect that had almost immediately on these artists who were taking these Japanese inventions and integrating them into their own artwork. And Impressionism, in a lot of ways, is the adoption of Japanese ideas about edges. So there are many scientific discoveries in art, and I'm sure there are many more yet to be discovered, but I truly believe that you cannot discover what's really new and take knowledge beyond where it is already unless you learn what's already known. So, it's really important that we take the time to study and learn the skills and the techniques that are already known in order to truly advance. If we purposely withhold information from our students, they're reinventing the wheel and they're making the same discoveries every generation that have already been discovered again and again and again. So I am a huge advocate for let's teach everything that's known about drawing and painting so that our students can truly move the field forward and make what are truly unique discoveries instead of forcing them to reinvent the wheel all the time. On this image here, this is actually a master copy of what's called a Bargue plate. So Charles Bargue and Jean Jerome were involved at the highest levels of art in Paris in the late 1800s and had a great influence over the schools there, and particularly Jerome did. And Jerome was very distraught because people were coming into his school from all over the place, especially all over France, and they had terrible drawing skills. And he felt that this was a tragedy because he really wanted to take them as far as he could take them in his school, and they were coming with very low level of skills into his atelier. So he actually created what's largely regarded as one of the very first national drawing curricula, and they were a series of lithographs that he sent out all throughout France. And the idea is that by copying these lithographs, students would learn a lot of the basic techniques they needed before they ever stepped foot in his school so that he could, really take them to advanced places. So this image here is actually a Bargue plate that I did. On the left is the original and on the right is the master copy. And this course is actually completely available for free to you if you go to the Da Vinci Initiative YouTube channel. And I will take you step by step in almost 30 videos of how to copy a Bargue plate well and how to discover what you're supposed to be learning and how to learn really nuanced drawing techniques by copying these plates. Now, copying often gets a bad reputation in contemporary art education circles. And I think that's really a shame because if you consider music, we don't give kids a trumpet and say, "Ooh, do whatever you feel like for the next 10 years. I'm not going to teach you notes or fingerings or anything like that." In fact, often what students are doing are master copies in music. They learn Mary Had a Little Lamb, and by copying music that already exists, they are able to hone their technique and skills so that they can compose and use a high level of skill in their original compositions. So there's really, I don't understand this resistance in the art world towards copying, because if you want to know what's already known about art, you need to study the old masters. And because we're in a visual field, the best way to learn visually is to copy drawings and paintings. It's actually way better to copy a drawing than it is to copy a photograph. The reason is that when you're copying a drawing, you're putting yourself in the mind of that artist and you are beginning to understand why did they make that choice. If you're looking at this arm in front of you and you look at your own arm in a mirror, you can ask yourself, oh, why did he put that mark there? And then you can look at your arm and understand, oh, there's a really good reason for that. So there's so much to be gained, particularly from copying other artists' drawings. In fact, in the history of atelier training, copying is one of the first projects that students will do and is strongly encouraged. And if you read Delacroix's journal, even at the age of 40, 50, he's around museums copying because that's how he advanced his own skill set. So just a little bit more about the ateliers generally. Ateliers are often full-time programs, although some ateliers do offer part-time study. So the first project, if you show up in an atelier, is often to do that master copy that I showed you in the previous slide. Once you've copied a few of those Bargue plates, often your next project will be to do what's called a cast drawing. Now, casts are often these plaster casts. They're made from a variety of famous sculptures. So this eye in front of you is actually a cast from the statue of David in Florence by Michelangelo. So the idea of copying casts is that white objects are much easier to draw than any other color. And the reason is that because they're light in value, they show a really nice range of lights and darks. And it's a really great way to get a beginner to really deepen their understanding of value and rendering. So this is one of my very first cast drawings that I ever did when I started my atelier training. I attended a 4-year atelier. I studied with Julia Aristides. She has a number of books out that I strongly recommend, and I put a picture later in the slide, but I always warn people, be very careful if you read her books, because I left the teaching profession for 4 years and moved to Seattle to go train with her, because that's how powerful her books are. Okay, so the next project that you do after you do a cast drawing is often some sort of still life object. So this is a drapery that I did, again, very early on in my atelier training. And this is done from life, but still trying to pick subjects that have a lot of light and dark and that are easy to see light and dark values on. Once you master your drawing skills, the idea is that you transition in a methodical way into painting. So one of the first projects you do in painting is to do what's called en grisaille. And what that means is that you're painting in black and white. Now, it's much more difficult to control paint than it is to control pencil or charcoal. So even though your eye is trained after a year of drawing much better than it was before you started atelier training, what you're trying to do is figure out how to manipulate paint at that same level. So that's why we work en grisaille, because it's a really good bridge between drawing and painting. The only new thing you have to learn about en grisaille painting versus drawing is how to manipulate paint. The value concepts are the same, the drawing concepts are the same. What's new is manipulating the paint. So you can see that there's a very methodical and purposeful reason why the training progresses the way it does. And the idea is to efficiently transfer very complex knowledge to the student. So the idea behind the ateliers is to give skills. The philosophy of the ateliers is it's our job to give you as many skills as we can so that you can make the art that's in your head and your heart without any compromise. And so we focus almost exclusively on building skills in these first few years. And then, as your skill set grows, then it becomes much more about, well, what are you saying with your art? What's important to you visually? What is it that matters, or what are you communicating? Okay, after the grisaille, the next project that would typically be done is called a limited palette study. Now, if you look at this little milk bottle here, many people are astonished to learn that this painting was done with just 3 colors: an ultramarine blue, a burnt sienna, and a white. Now, the reason it looks so colorful is because the nuance of that full range between the burnt sienna, that orangey color that you see, all the way to the blue that you can see on the edge of the bottle are used. And when you mix blue and orange together, the middle range is neutral. So those tan colors that you see there are actually a combination of the blue and the burnt sienna. The idea here is that by using warm colors and cool colors, you can create a very colorful looking painting, but you're only dealing with 3 colors on your palette, which is very, very helpful when students are first starting to add colors to their palette in order to help them kind of organize that visual information in their head. Keep it very small and limited in the beginning. There's always room to expand. Another thing that you would do throughout your atelier training is work from models, work from life. So particularly from the nude figure is very common, but because most of the students that I work with are art teachers and I want them to be able to use these resources in their classroom, I tend to show examples of portraiture work. So you can see that this is a charcoal drawing done using those techniques that were learned in the bark plate, that were learned in the other drawing projects, and used to draw something in a subject that was important to me. And here's an example of a full color painting. So once you do those limited palette studies, as you progress, as you do master copies of how other people painted skin tones and figured out what colors they used, you figure out which colors you like to use in your skin tones, and you start applying them and practicing them to your own artwork. So this model, I had so much fun painting this painting because this was supposed to be a portrait model, but she came in, sat down on this couch. She was wearing blue pants, a blue shirt, and she was sitting on the blue couch that just happened to have a blue background behind it. And I was like, oh my goodness, what a beautiful composition of blue. This painting, because I had the skills of how to control all the elements, control my drawing, control my painting, I could use what resonated with me in this moment with this visual information, this visual scene in front of me, and create a painting to share with my viewers exactly how I felt when she sat down on that couch. So that is like the great joy and amazing thing about having such a broad skill set that you can create any art that you want to. So, who should go to an atelier? If you want to draw and paint realistically, you should go to an atelier. If you have students that want to be serious artists, ateliers are much cheaper than a four-year university, and they have a much higher success rate of professional artists that make their living from painting than traditional universities. So, for example, many of my friends are portrait artists, professional portrait artists. I have an acquaintance that worked for NASA for a period of time painting astronauts. So when you have a strong skill set, there is plenty of work to be a professional painter, a professional artist. You know, a lot of the instructors at one of the ateliers I attended were constantly being poached out by this school that trains people how to make video game art because the skill set was so desired there. And it didn't matter that none of these people had college degrees. All of a sudden they made them college professors because they wanted their students to know these skills. So what matters in the art world is really your portfolio, and why not showcase this highest level of skill in your portfolio? And if it's your student's intention or your intention to be a professional artist, an atelier is definitely the best place to get training. Also, if you're an art teacher and maybe realism isn't really your jam, but you want to make sure that you're providing a broad array of skill sets or ideas to your students, maybe you want to pursue atelier training just so that you have more to share with your students. So I get teachers all the time that, you know, are more interested in working in a modernist way themselves, but they get students in their classroom that always want to make things look real. And so they come to my atelier because they want to be able to teach those skills to the students who are seeking them. Training in the atelier gives you power. It gives you control. You know, this cast drawing that you see on the screen here was actually done entirely with Crayola crayon actually. And I was doing this cast drawing demonstration for my students, and I was setting it up, and I was telling them, oh, well, you can draw with anything if your eye is trained well. You could draw with a crayon. And of course they said, prove it. And of course I had put my money where my mouth was. But the moral of the story here is that if your eye is trained well, it's not about the materials, it's about seeing really well. This training isn't about oil paint or charcoal. This training is about helping your eye see these amazing nuanced things that are out there in the world that require training in order to see them. And you need someone that has eyes that are trained better than yours to make your eyes better. And just to prove this, I want to show you these two drawings side by side. So this first drawing was right before I first started my first serious atelier training. I had read Juliet's books and I was applying everything I could to the drawing on the left. And the drawing to the right is my first atelier experience. I was studying with Camille Corey in Salt Lake City, and you can see just an amazing difference between these two choices. The understanding of values, the understanding of form, the nuance of shape. It's night and day difference, and this was just a few weeks of training, and look at how the skill set grew. And anybody can grow their skill set. It doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter if you can't draw a stick figure. The only difference between artists that can draw and paint in this atelier manner and artists that cannot is that they haven't had access to the training. Any normally functioning human being is capable of learning how to draw and paint at high levels, just like we learn how to read, just like we learn how to add. It's just a matter of, do you invest the time and energy into learning these skills? Anybody can learn this that chooses to invest their time and to study under someone that knows it. So, frequently asked questions that I get when I am presenting all over the country about atelier training. Do I already have to be good? No, of course not. The reason you go to an atelier is because you want to be very skilled. So the ateliers, even though they often ask for a portfolio, what they're looking for is that you have an interest in drawing or painting realistically. So if you submit works that show that you have an interest in learning that, that's all they're looking for. They do not expect you to draw and paint as if you had studied at an atelier for 4 years. That's why you're coming to the atelier. So a lot of potential students to ateliers are put off by the portfolio application. Please don't be one of them. It doesn't matter what's in your portfolio as long as it shows that you are interested in realistic drawing and painting. Will training ruin my creativity? I get asked this question a lot. Typically what I tend to do is I'll teach a quick skill like a perspective skill or something like that, and then I will ask, is your creativity ruined for all time because you learned something new about art technique? And usually the answer is no. This idea that training will ruin your creativity is really an extremist view. If you look at any other subject, do we feel like learning your alphabet and letters and spelling ruins your ability to be able to write fiction? I don't think I've never heard anybody make that argument before. So this idea that having more skills will inhibit you in some way doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make sense for any other subject, and it doesn't make sense for this one. How do you find an atelier? So there are lots of options. Of course, as many of the people I work with and who may be watching this video are art teachers, I strongly encourage you to attend the Art Teacher Atelier from School of Atelier Arts. However, there are many ateliers all over the country, and some of them may be close to you. You can find a pretty comprehensive list of ateliers at artrenewal.org. They keep an interactive map so you can see where ateliers are all over the country. Also there's increasingly some really amazing online resources. If you just type in atelier training or classical realism or realistic drawing and painting skills, you will discover that many of these ateliers now have online options for you where they will train you long distance through video calls in your home. So there's so many cool options available, and this information has never been this accessible to people before. It's a wonderful moment in time to incorporate these skills into your artwork, into your classroom practice, into your life, because when you really train well, it's amazing all these visual discoveries that you can make that you weren't seeing before. All of a sudden you can actually see more colors than you've ever seen before. Like, a lot of people don't know this, but if someone who can see more colors than you, they can actually teach you to see more colors than you've seen before. Like, that's amazing. Who doesn't want to see more colors? So if you want to see more colors, I encourage you to study painting at an atelier. And can I start learning today? Of course you can. There's all sorts of online options for you. The School of Atelier Arts has a YouTube channel. The Da Vinci Initiative, which is another organization I've been involved with, has a full tutorial on how to do a bark plate, which would be the first project you would do in an atelier anyways. It's free and it's very thorough. I strongly encourage you to check it out. And also there's all sorts of tutorials, and again, the atelier community is really putting a lot of content out there these days. If you just type in atelier training, you'll find some amazing resources. Here's those books I promised you, those very dangerous ones by Julia Aristides before I started training with her. She is an amazing, she has incredible philosophy. So even if you're not interested in atelier training, but you are interested in artistic philosophy, I encourage you to check out these books because they're very moving. Okay, so here's some resources for you if you would like to learn more. So the School of Atelier Arts website, follow us on Instagram at Mandy Fine Artist, at School of Atelier Arts, and of course you can follow us on Facebook as well. So don't forget there's free lesson plans at davinciinitiative.org as well for you. So all sorts of resources available to help you on your own atelier journey. So thank you very much for joining me for this presentation. I am very excited as always to share what I know about the atelier world with anybody aspiring to draw and paint realistically, and I encourage you to start your journey today.